What's already looking like a pretty difficult start for Aston Martin to F1 2025 looks like it's getting a bit more difficult as a key member of their technical team now won't be available as early as they thought. John, the last time we were talking about Aston Martin, there was a big internal overhaul. Andy Cow was basically demoting Mike Kraken, taking his job. He's now team principal as well as CEO. And during that discussion, we were wondering about Enrico Cardile, the former Ferrari technical director who's supposed to be joining Aston Martin. There was no news on when he would start. The team was hoping he would have started at the beginning of 2025 in January. Now there's a whole legal drama involving Cardile and Ferrari, and that affects Aston Martin. Can you fill us in on what's going on?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating development, actually, because we heard a lot last year about Aston Martin putting in place the kind of pillars of its future. You had Adrian Newey coming on board and Enrico Cardile from Ferrari. It was announced last July that Enrico would be joining, but there was no start date. Early on with Adrian Newey, we had March the 3rd was always penciled in as this is the moment he begins work. Towards the end of last year, there was hopes from within Aston Martin that maybe he could arrive in January, which would be hugely useful. He'd bring some knowledge of how these current ground effect cars work best. He could get a head start on the 25, kind of the final stage of the 25 car, get rolling with 26 and provide a springboard into the arrival of Newey. That hadn't happened. But more intriguingly, though, was when we asked Aston Martin, have you got a start date? It was always kind of mystery and they weren't really given a proper explanation. Bahrain test last week, Andy Cowell spoke to us. We had a bit of a round table with him and I asked him, what's the latest? Have you got a start date for Enrico? And he gave a very answer about, we look forward to lots of people joining us, and kind of circled round the issue. We couldn't get an answer. There was a lot of mystery. We tried to give him some more prodding on it, but no biting. Now the story's come out. So we found out from Ferrari this morning that they took Cardile actually to court. They've had a legal case, court action in the court of Modena. They suspected he'd already started working with Aston Martin, collaborating with them prior to him being released from his gardening leave. The court found this was actually in breach of the terms, so he's been ordered to cease all activity with Aston Martin, and he cannot do anything for the team until July the 18th. So still a bit away. And it will be a bit of a blow to Aston Martin that had hoped to get him on board as early as possible. It's now going to have to wait, and July is actually quite late in the year for someone, a senior technical person like that, to be joining.
Yeah, there's quite a lot to unpick there. Let's maybe start with the core element. That's quite intriguing because obviously when teams poach technical staff or leaders or even rank and file staff from other teams, there's periods of gardening leave, as it's known, built into the contracts whereby they effectively don't work for anyone. They just tend to their garden while their contract runs down. We don't normally hear about guys being taken to court by their previous teams for effectively working for their new team on the sly. You can't kind of stop this stuff happening. I mean, Adrian Newey famously has drawn new designs for teams he's joined while still sort of technically working for his old team, having been kind of shown the door. What's changed in this situation? How has Ferrari got wind of Cardile being up to something and taken it this far?
Yeah, we don't have the full background as to what they found or how they found it, but I think it's all part of a push by Ferrari to get serious about losing staff. Fred Vasseur has done a lot to stop information leaking outside of Ferrari. It's clear Aston Martin's becoming a big force. It's looking to fight for the championship in 26, 27. So there's no way that if a team is serious about personnel it's got under its contract, it's not going to happily let them go and take all their secrets and information any earlier to another team. This is why we have long periods of gardening leave. So Ferrari, may have found, from computer files or some reasons to why it felt there was collaboration going on. Obviously, you can't stop people on gardening leave coming up with ideas. You can't stop them drawing things. You can't stop them looking at cars. But I think there is a line between an individual doing that themselves and then that actually being transferred to the new team. And what was quite interesting was last year when we spoke to Mike Crack, when he was team principal at Aston Martin, he talked about the huge kind of value the team could get from having somebody like Adrian Newey or Enrico with knowledge of making a successful current car, because it's something that Aston Martin has struggled with. It's struggled to bring on developments, it's struggled to extract extra performance from these cars, so just needed this guidance and a bit of input to get it on the right path. So how or Where it was getting this information from, we don't know. I mean, we know Adrian Newey's been around the factory. We were presented at a press conference. He was there, and as we were working away in the media centre, we could see him walking around with Andy Cowell at the time. We could see him walking around with Lawrence Stroll. So he's clearly, seeing everything Aston Martin. You can guarantee that Adrian's given them some pointers on the car. But I think it's where that line is between what's allowed and what's a bit of kind of informal advice, and where does it become serious and you actually start working actually on a car and there's a transfer of IP, because that I think is the main issue.
Yeah, it's a tricky line to draw sometimes, isn't it? And of course, there might be also an element of Aston Martin making maybe a bit too much noise about the super team they've been building, because Red Bull weren't particularly happy at Aston Martin and Lawrence Stroll doing a big press conference announcing Adrian's arrival when he was sort of technically still at Red Bull, even though he wasn't really doing anything for them. So you can imagine kind of teams taking notice. I mean, in some ways, it's a compliment to Aston Martin that some teams are worried about what they're building. The ingredients of having Newey there, Cardile there eventually, plus the Honda project coming on, Andy Cowell running the show, that's potentially quite potent. But the fact that now they can't get Cardile until the summer, that's surely a massive blow to their project, because not only do you not get the benefit of his current car knowledge in terms of improving Aston's quite disappointing status in F1 right now, he's going to miss a key point of the 2026 new rules process in terms of integrating with that project and working with Newey, isn't he?
Yeah, it may seem the difference between arriving in January and arriving in July may seem from the outside just a couple of months. Surely it's not important, but these months are absolutely critical. If Enrico had joined in January, there could have been the input into some 25 car, pushing on design ideas or concepts or where it should focus with developments and upgrades. He would have arrived on the very first day where they start working on 26. So teams weren't allowed to begin proper aero evaluation of the 26 cars until January the 1st. So had he arrived on this date, would have been great for getting on with late development of 25 and getting ahead on 2026. Now he arrives in July. That's a lot of months of work already committed for the 26 car. Adrian Newey is already well entrenched in there already. And you're also arriving a couple of weeks before the summer break. So he's going to turn up at Aston Martin, only be able to do a couple of weeks, and then he's forced again to take time off because
more holiday
for the summer shutdown. So, while this will be great news for Enrico's garden, because it will mean some extra weeks of being tended to, it's not of big value to Aston Martin. Also, because by July, I think teams will have to be switching off their development of the 25 cars. You come to a physical point where there's no point bringing new developments through because of production and manufacturing design elements. So he's arriving at a point where his input on 25 will be absolutely minimal unless he's got a revolutionary idea. And it's very, very late into the 26 project, because by this stage you're 6 months into it and a lot of the main concepts will be sorted. So, I mean, in some senses, Ferrari have got a bit of a victory here, because it's minimising the impact that Enrico can give into 26, and probably means his benefits won't be fully felt until 27 at the earliest.
Yeah, it's a clever play from Ferrari, kind of pulling every lever they can, and Fred Vasseur probably making sure that Ferrari isn't perceived as being too nice. You need that kind of cutthroat element to thrive, especially with the big unknown of how 2026 is going to shake out. But how does Aston Martin deal with this situation they have at hand? And apart from Andy Cowell tying himself in knots, not answering questions about Cardile arriving, they now have to deal with the fact he's not going to be there as early as they wanted. Newey's started and is going to have to kind of do that project solo. How are they going to mitigate the damage, let's say?
I think that the key element will be having to decide pretty quickly at the start of the season where Adrian's focus needs to be. We saw a quite kind of low-key test for Aston Martin in Bahrain. It looks to be the 8th, 9th quickest team. Fernando Alonso gave us the biggest indication of their form, where he said it doesn't seem to be much different to the end of last season. And they ended last season 8th, 9th quickest team.
He was grumpy, wasn't he?
Yeah, I wouldn't say. I think it was Fernando Alonso being the diplomat in kind of answering questions, but giving away enough to understand what he was talking about. Because he talked about, wind tunnel correlation being very good, and what the factory was saying, what the track was saying, being quite spot on. But that doesn't tell you the quality of the good news from the factory or the bad news from the factory. It just means it matched. So it doesn't really tell us that they've made the progress they'd hoped for. So I think Aston Martin needs to make a decision. Does it bring Adrian to try and improve the 25 car and make some progress and get up the grid? Because it doesn't want to fall backwards. It can't afford to fall off the back, so it needs to make progress. Does it get him heavily involved into 26, even though that project will now be quite a way down the road, and focus there? Or does it do a mix? Does it throw him initially into 25, try to rescue that, and then put him onto 27, and that becomes the first Adrian Newey car if he feels it's very different to 26? So I think there's some initial early decisions the team's going to have to take. It will also depend on competitiveness, because if the team is well adrift at the start of the season, does it just say, well, let's just write this year off and we'll look to the future? Or does it actually decide it needs to throw more in and push forward?